Okay, so hello everyone. Some of you are still joining. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jordan Howell, and I'm Associate Professor of Sustainable Business here at Rowan, and also the co-director of the Rowan Center for Responsible Leadership. So today, in collaboration with the Rowan Center for Sports, Communication, and Social Impact, we're excited to welcome Ed Andrews, CEO of Resorts Digital Gaming, Emma Richardson, General Counsel for White Hat Gaming, and Wayne Kimmel, Managing Partner of 76 Capital, to talk about the online sports betting industry. They'll discuss the challenges of, quote unquote, importing a well-established business from the UK to a new legal market in the US, ethical concerns relating to the gaming industry and especially online gaming, and the process of partnering with professional sports teams and leagues through sponsorship arrangements. So some info about our speakers. Ed Andrews has over 20 years of experience in the online betting and gaming industry. He has previously held roles as Managing Director of Victor Chandler International in Gibraltar and as Managing Director of the digital division of Ladbrokes, a leading British betting and gaming company now part of the GVC Group. Ed has been working with Resorts Digital Gaming, the digital arm of Resorts Casino and Hotel based in Atlantic City, since May 2015, and moved permanently to the U.S. at the beginning of 2016 take up the role of CEO. He's also a decent tennis player, if I can add that in there as a fun fact about Ed.
Well, if I'm a decent tennis player, that makes you're a lot better than me, so you must be.
You're too kind, Ed.
I don't for a championship.
Oh, well, thank you. I don't know if Emma Richardson is any good at tennis or not, but she is White Hat Gaming's General Counsel and Head of Legal, Compliance, and Regulation with over 11 years' experience in the industry. Emma leads 10 teams within White Hat Gaming and has extensive experience in licensing, regulation, and governance. Prior to joining White Hat, Emma has had various gaming roles, including Head of Legal and Regulation for Combi and European Legal Counsel for Sportingbet. Emma started her legal career as a corporate and private equity lawyer in the London office of a top-tier U.S. law firm. And lastly, we have Wayne Kimmel, who's a sports tech venture capitalist, entrepreneur, and author of 6 Degrees of Wayne Kimmel. He's the managing partner of 76 Capital, the venture capital company he founded in 1999, and invests in startups, sports tech, esports, and sports betting companies. Wayne is also the chairman of the 76 Capital Sports Advisory, which is a sports consulting group comprised of an expert team focused on bringing the emerging innovations and technology to sports executives, teams, leagues, brands, and athletes. Wayne and his team created the 76 Capital Athlete Venture Group, which allows professional athletes to invest, learn, and work directly with top sports tech startups and entrepreneurs. The Athlete Venture Group aims to bridge the gap between athletes, entrepreneurs, and investors by creating opportunities for athletes to become tech investors and for entrepreneurs to access the financial and social capital that professional athletes have to offer. So really a sensational group who have helped to build online sports betting into the force that it is becoming in the U.S. today. So we'll hear from our speakers and then take questions and comments at the end. So during the talk, please do type your questions and comments into the chat box area, and then I'll pose them to our speakers when it's time. All right, so we're going to hand it over here to Ed and Emma first, and then we'll hear from Wayne. So Ed, let's see, you should be able to share your screen now.
Yeah, good.
No?
Yeah, should be, yeah. Just getting the, didn't actually come onto the, here we go.
All right, there it is.
Is that looking good?
Looks good.
Great. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you, Jordan, for that introduction, and thank you to the university for having me along today. Trying to get onto the next. trying to drive the presentation forward when it's. Now I go to the next slide. Here we go. Sorry, yeah,
All right.
got it, yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you, Jordan, for the introduction. I think I won't sort of dwell too much more because I think you kind of covered most of it, but just very quickly. So I work for Resorts Digital Gaming, which is the digital arm of Resorts Casino Hotel in Atlantic City, which some of you may be familiar with. Resorts was actually the first casino outside Nevada, so it has quite a long history, and I'm sure most of you will be too young to remember, but you might have heard of a chap called Frank Sinatra, and he actually played in Resorts more than any other venue, so there's a kind of bit of heritage there, and I should say that it's the casinos in Atlantic City and the racetracks who hold the rights to the online licenses. And under our license, we're allowed to have other partners, 2 in terms of sports betting and a further 4 in terms of online casino, and really kind of remaining focused on the sports betting side of things. We also partnered up with DraftKings and Fox Bet, which is all part of the PokerStars online group. And I'll just hand over to Emma quickly to introduce you to White Hat Gaming.
Sure, thanks again for having me today. So I'm General Counsel and Head of Legal Compliance and Regulation at White Hat Gaming, and we are a full-service platform in the US and in Europe. So we offer the player account management system, which can be modular and includes lots of different parts to it. So I actually did a diagram, which is much easier to explain because it's modular. On top of that, we actually are also a gaming operator in our own right, but not in the US, in Europe. So we do also hold those licenses both to operate for ourselves and on a white label basis. So I come from an angle of looking at it sort of in 3 different business strategies. We're integrated with Kambi Sportsbook, and we have over 100 leading gaming providers. And we are, importantly, the PAM provider for Penn National. Penn National have, I think now, 41 properties across 19 states in the US, and they did a strategic partnership with Barstool Sports recently, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. They are massively popular in the US, as we're discovering. So they have a very large footprint in the US, and that's our first venture into the US so far.
Right. So thank you, Emma. And I thought I'd start this morning by just giving you a brief history of global online betting, because it kind of sets the scene for where we are today within the context of the US. And you'll hear through the presentation, you'll hear me allude to both sports betting and gaming. There is a bit of a division and there's a bit of a difference within the regulation. For the purposes of this presentation, we'll really kind of remain focused on sports betting, but there are quite a few product verticals within the wider online gaming space. So sports betting is the obvious one, which is catching all the headlines at the moment. But then you'll also hear people talk about online gaming, which is more the traditional casino products, online poker, multiplayer poker, where the operator takes a rake. And then you've got the lotteries. So most of the state-operated lotteries are now looking at going online in the states they can. And there's other softer gaming games such as bingo. So in terms of the start of online gaming, really, I mean, it's as old as the internet, so back to the mid-90s. And in those days, no one had really regulated the interregulated stuff going online. So it was more the less regulated jurisdictions who saw the opportunity. So there were operators, went out to the likes of Antigua, Curacao, and Costa Rica. And these were some of the early companies operating in the black market into the US, and we'll come on and allude to that a bit further down the line as we talk about regulations as they are today. Then towards the early 2000s, some of the more regulated jurisdictions, such as Gibraltar, Isle of Man, Malta, actually started regulating online. And they were really, operators from there were really, could pretty much access markets all around the world, because in the likes of the UK, other European countries, Australia, regulation hadn't really caught up. So these sort of smaller jurisdictions, a lot of them with history in financial services as tax-efficient jurisdictions, started regulating for online gaming, and a lot of the big operators moved to those jurisdictions. Then by 2010, online gaming was becoming regulated and legal in quite a few countries around the world, Europe and Australia being the better examples. So their legislation started catching up, and now within the likes of the United Kingdom, you actually have to have a local license as well as being able to operate for one of the tax-efficient Austrian jurisdictions. In 2013, New Jersey became the third state to permit online gaming. So important to note, this was gaming only, allowing poker and casino products. And I say the third state because there was online gaming regulation in a couple of other states, but it was very niche. It wasn't your traditional across the board gaming products. So New Jersey really kind of stole a march on the market, and we'll come on to discuss how this has set them up perfectly to sort of take a lead in New Jersey in terms of online sports betting and legal sports betting as a whole on property as well. And the big change for sports betting and regulation of sports betting came in 2018, a act which in the industry we've now become very familiar with and we call PASPA for short. Long name, if you're interested, is Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, which really prohibited sports betting across the board, other in 5 states. But in those 5 states, it was very restricted and certainly didn't allow betting online. So in the likes of Nevada, you could bet within the casino, and then there were kind of other states, Delaware, certain very niche product around multi-bets on horses was allowed online, and then a couple of other states, mostly tied to the lotteries. But it was only really with PASPA repealed in 2018 that it kind of opened up the way for wholesale legal sports betting, and in particular online sports betting across every state. It allowed every state to introduce their own regulations, irrelevant of what was going on from a federal point of view. And just to give you an idea of the global industry, and again, we'll get more specific around where we are in the US at the moment, the global revenues for online betting, and this is both across gaming and sports betting, has grown from $850 million in 1998 to $56 billion by 2018. So it is a massive global industry and sector. So where we are now post PASPA, the regulation has really taken off. So states, after a sort of few false dawns, have really kind of accelerated into regulating online sports betting, and particularly see the opportunity, and we'll come on to those a bit later. But now sports betting regulated in 21 states, Colorado, Delaware, District of Columbia, Illinois, and you can see them all listed. I won't go through one by one. In addition, there's states where there is law has been passed, but they're still waiting to implement the regulations, which is a key part of the environment we operate in. And Emma's going to speak a bit about that further on. And legislation is remaining pending in 5 other states. Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Ohio, and South Dakota. To be honest, a lot of those states would have regulated already, but the issues around COVID and closing the state legislators and regulators has kind of delayed. And there's also legislation to expand the existing laws both in New Jersey and New York, which are obviously key sports betting states. So things have really started to accelerate in the US since that repeal of PASPA. And just to give you a kind of idea of where it is in terms of the size of the market for the US alone. So we're talking about in next year, which pretty accurate figure. Now they know which states have legislated, and more important, which states have regulated, so that operators can actually start operating in those jurisdictions. But $3.2 billion in 2021, and then this diagram also builds out the case should another 45 states, as predicted. There's probably 5 states that are still a long way off allowing sports betting and online sports betting, but it'll take you up to 8.3 billion by 2024. And the majority of that, you can see the blue at the bottom is sports betting at casinos themselves, and that big chunk on top of that is the online is the prediction for the online segment, which is kind of key here, really. I mean, people don't want to travel to the casinos and place their bets, but when you can do it on home or on your phone as you're watching the sport, is where it's going to be really popular. And both New Jersey and Pennsylvania, local to us here, are already within the top 5 regulated online casino markets in the world. So not sports betting, because sports betting is still in its early days, but that gives you some indication of what an impact some of the bigger states can be in terms of not just a US market but a global market. So within our industry, the US is seen as absolutely critical for growth. And as I've said, New Jersey has really led the way on this. Online gaming came in back in 2013, and you can kind of see the impressive growth there from 8.4 million in 2013 to 419 million in 2019. And with the impact of COVID and the casinos closing, that is really that's going up at a rate of almost double at the moment. And the fact that there was that experience for online gaming, where New Jersey was really the first state to regulate it in any meaningful way, has really allowed New Jersey to take the lead in online sports betting. And it was New Jersey who actually challenged PASPA in the first place, and really kind of did a lot of the lobbying for the Supreme Court case back in 2018 to overturn PASPA. And New Jersey has gone on really sort of being the gold standard for regulation of online sports betting and sports betting in general. So really kind of what I wanted to do, having sort of set the scene for the size of the industry and the impact it can have, what we really wanted to do was outline, so what have the challenges been in and as Jordan used his inverted comments in importing the industry and kind of what we've seen. I mean, I wasn't quite here in 2013, but moved out in 2015, so kind of lived through some of the challenges. And I think the first thing I'd like to emphasize is it wasn't a completely new industry. You have to bear in mind, and we'll come back to referring to this quite a lot in terms of the opportunities, but there was quite a lot of online betting and sports betting existing in the US already. It was a sort of weird phenomenon for me arriving here in the US, because so many people were sports betting. You know, quite a lot of the more traditional, older section of the community maybe had their sports betting bookie at the corner of the street, and then some of the younger ones were accessing some of these very popular offshore black market sites based out of Curacao and Costa Rica, generating a lot of money. So it wasn't a complete starting point. There was a sort of, if you like, black market industry already existing. And within that context, there was definitely a lack of knowledgeable training of staff, which I guess is why you guys have to put up with Europeans like me trying to tell you what to do and not do it very successfully. But so there was quite a big learning curve and training of the staff with experience in this sector. But it's come very quickly, and there's a lot of good skill base already existing in the US in terms of things like digital marketing and other sectors. There was quite a lot of crossover with what was happening in the daily fantasy sports market, and a lot of those employees were recruited across. And the likes of FanDuel and DraftKings have been particularly successful because they already had that training within the house. There was quite a lot of educating the customer to be done. I think particularly in convincing the more mainstream customers that this was a legal and regulated sector now. They weren't having to sort of go underground with it. A lot of the offshore sites, it should be said, were kind of frequently blocked by the regulators over in the US. So it was always a bit of a cat and mouse, making sure that your customers could access your offshore site. And to be honest, the regulated product does differ in terms of the products on offer for the black market sports betting site. So there was a fair bit of education in terms of educating the customer, and we've kind of used a lot of sort of online training videos, simplifying a lot of explanation around how the odds work. And payment processing was another area where there was fair challenge across the way. And again, that has slowly improved as more states have regulated. Again, repealing PASPA has really opened up the payment processing, but it's still Bank of America and TD Bank still avoid, just to name two, still avoid working within the online gambling and sports betting specifically areas. So there's still a fair amount of education and working with the payment processors and banks. Public perceptions of gambling, I've touched on a bit, and definitely again over time we've seen a change in that. And I thought it was sort of quite telling that in the recent elections there were 6 states which had votes on some kind of legislation involving gambling, and all 6 of them unanimously passed in favor of gambling in those states. They were quite broad ranging. I won't go into specifics each of the bill, but I thought it was kind of quite telling that all those were really passed with pretty stonking majorities. Geolocation has become a challenge because each state has their own regulation. So the state needs to check that you're in that state. That doesn't happen within Europe. If you're in that country, you'll be able to bet. And I know Emma's going to go on and speak a bit more about that and the challenges of geolocation within the regulation. Software development has been a challenge. A lot of the European companies have come into the market, such as Emma's White Hat Gaming. But I think there's had to be a lot of changes for the regulation to that software. So it hasn't been a question of we use this platform and this software and all the sort of intricacies of offering a new product in the US, it hasn't been a simple question of saying, this works well in Europe, we can dump it into the US. There's had to be a lot of changes and development, and that has taken time and, frankly, quite a lot of cost, particularly for the platform providers who often have a kind of relationship with the operators and the license holders themselves. I think there's been more additional costs than they'd originally factored in making the product fit for purpose in the regulated market. Prevention of fraud and money laundering. Again, this is an area of key concern, as you can imagine, for all the regulators, and the experience and know-how of some of the fraud cases that can occur with gambling. Building out that knowledge has taken some time, but it's very robust now, and it comes back to the fact that in previous times it was all within a black market where it wasn't possible to enforce some of those prevention of fraud and money laundering measures. And then lastly, before I hand over to Emma to talk in more detail about the regulations, I think market access has been tricky. In Europe, it's been much easier if you're an operator to spread your service across the various countries rather than states. But in the US, every state has got different regulation and different laws around who actually owns the right to those licenses. For us in New Jersey, as one of the casinos that have the licenses, it's been beneficial because we've managed to partner with some of the stronger, bigger brands who've really managed to put the marketing bucks in, and we've benefited from those arrangements. But if you're an operator wishing to roll out across the US, you've really got to pick your market carefully, both in terms of the regulations and how much you're paying to access the market in terms of getting the licenses. So I'm going to break off at that point and neatly takes you into hearing from Emma about some of the challenges that the regulation in the US has produced.
Thanks, Ed. So obviously, Europe, we've had quite a lot of experience in doing licensing and drafting regulations, and while the US has had a long and rich history of sports betting, unsurprisingly, the history of sports betting in Europe is even longer. Now, just to start off, to give you sort of a clue of what's going on in Europe, we don't have sector-specific legislation in the EU in the field of gambling. So that means each EU country is autonomous, albeit they have to comply with the treaty and the functionality of the European Union. So the legislation somewhat has to comply with EU law, but you are autonomous to make your own legislation in that country. And what that's resulted in is an absolutely diverse regulatory framework, from monopolistic regimes like Finland, Austria, and Norway to actually quite mature licensing systems with different regulations, such as Denmark, Spain, Italy, UK, some with a complete ban, more so outside of Europe now is the complete ban, or ones with no clear online regulation because the laws were put in place before the internet was even considered, and they haven't been clarified since. So to take that to transfer us into the US world, it is quite similar in the sense that it's state by state, just like it's country by country in Europe. Now, what I would say is because it differs, that brings with it some challenges, but it also brings some benefit of hindsight for the US to be able to look back at what's worked in Europe and what hasn't worked in Europe, and also to see the variance in how jurisdiction manages to adapt the laws to current and future industry needs. And what I mean by that also is around research. So research is so significant in Europe around responsible gambling, around advertising, around affordability, around underage gambling, around sports integrity. around combating financing of terrorism and anti-money laundering. And there is plenty of information and data that has been gathered both from a research perspective and from players that would be quite critical for the US to learn from. Now, given that there is a number of very mature regulatory markets within Europe, for example, we have Malta that regulated in 2001, we have the UK which regulated in 2005, and we have Denmark that regulated in 2012. We have Spain, I think that was in 2011. There is plenty of variations in those regulations, but what I like to say in the US is pick the bits that work from each jurisdiction and come up with better regulations or enhanced regulations that work for 2020 and beyond. And I think the key things that we have to get right is responsible gambling and player protection, which I'll come on to a bit later in the talk, AML and CFT, advertising and affordability. Now, when you take that straight over to the US, we know that New Jersey paved the way, as Ed said, and quite frankly became the blueprint for how regulations will look. I wouldn't say everyone has followed them, but certainly they set a high standard for other states to follow. But we have seen variance in how the other states are doing it. And of course, the landscape is continually changing as more states regulate, as more states learn from what other states have done. We are seeing, though, quite a collaborative approach, which I think is hugely encouraging to see. And that's not just collaboration between the regulators, but also between operators, suppliers, technology partners like geolocation services, AML services, etc. So there has been quite a collaborative approach, and that is definitely something to be encouraged going forward. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we talk about the challenges of responsible gambling a bit later. I think arguably already maybe the US is a little bit more harmonised than Europe, because New Jersey led the way. They set the standard and people are following. However, there has been a different approach in the US to what verticals, as Ed talked about earlier, will be allowed in which state. And of course, you know, there's different timing around that as well, and different thinking. And I think the US thinking on responsible gambling and player protection is still at a very early stage. The priority was post-PASPA, which was, I think someone did ask a question earlier, how hard was it to get sports betting passed? It was monumental, absolutely monumental that when PASPA was repealed. It was a long, long journey, and one that most of us in Europe were preparing for years as part of our business plans for the US to open. And it was many years in the waiting, and it was quite a challenge. And really the priority was to get regulations out, get licensed, go through the due diligence and get licenses. And now I believe in 2021, I can already see the agendas being set by regulators, by organisations like Idea Growth, and collaborations happening to focus on these key areas now. But, post-PASPA, there was a rush to market. So that's really, touching on the difference and the very similarities between Europe and the US. And no doubt there is people like Ed who are now based in the US and are taking their learnings from Europe over the US. And I have every confidence that over the years, the regulations will continue to improve and be shaped in those key areas. Back to Ed.
Great. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, and I'm seeing some great questions coming in. Couple from Brandon. Brandon, I would say, Emma may say I'm biased, but I'd say there was a specific country in Europe that became the blue model. It probably was the UK. And I know the DGE within New Jersey have spent a lot of time with the Gambling Commission over in the UK, both before regulation and even with sports coming. I know they had a big delegation who went there for a couple of weeks. And also a nice question in terms of how it might extend the coverage of sport and the interest in sport, and I'll come on to that as we go through. So really, I mean, I firmly believe the sector, and you may well say it's in my interest to do so, but I do firmly believe the sector has provided many positives, and I think it comes back to the fact that there was a thriving black market before the regulation came in. So it was happening anyway. So very important that with regulation, you have those protections for the consumer. And again, Emma's going to speak a bit more about that further on. And also it allows the state to make financial use of not least the contribution in straightforward tax, but also the other benefits it's provided to particularly Atlantic City, which, you know, I'm sure of you, as all of you, you know, or I suspect the majority of you being fairly local will know that Atlantic City has had its financial challenges, you know, particularly towards 2008, 2009 with the recession then. And really this had kind of injected a lot into the local economy, both wider New Jersey, but specifically within Atlantic City and to the casinos. So just a few facts there of what these are all produced by the IDEA, who did a special report in terms of examining what the online gaming industry had done since being introduced in 2013. So $2 billion in output from all the sales of facilities, equipment, technology, and additional investment. Over 6,500 in terms of new direct jobs or full-time equivalents. You know, over I think I left a million out there. Over 400 million in wages to employees, and you know, over 250 million in terms of tax revenue since 2019. So these are kind of substantial numbers being generated for the local economy and straightforward taxation to the state and local agencies. So just from a financial point, you know, there has been a lot of positives to take away from what was happening anyway. And I'll hand you back to Emma to talk a bit about protecting the customer and how that is key for the whole sector.
Yeah, I do think that protecting the customer protects your business sustainably. If you can have players that come and play with you in a safe, secure and supportive manner, they will stay with you. So I actually think it's important for businesses to get this right. And I do see that I had a question come in from Brandon around, is there a specific European country that serves as a model for sports betting? And it does somewhat feed into what I'm about to discuss, which is no. I think it is very much a pick and mix among some of the most mature regulated markets to pick and choose what works and what doesn't work, which segues quite well into what I'm speaking about, which is we have a wealth of experience in Europe with a wealth of knowledge in the area of responsible gambling and player welfare and player protection. And that's not only through extensive research, particularly in the UK, player data, because we have a wealth of it, including at White Hat, because we have so many brands, we get a lot of data so we can detect patterns and what works and what doesn't work. We, across Europe, there is a variety of different player protection tools that players can use, between deposit limits, time limits, self-exclusion, timeouts where you just take a break for a moment, panic buttons where you can hit it if you feel like you're out of control, etc., etc. And every country has different player protection tools, but of course a lot of us operators are in all of those countries, so we're able to analyze what works and what doesn't work. On top of that, you have technology now. For example, we have an algorithm that detects at-risk behavior that we may suggest that a player is vulnerable. And that kind of technology is of great use to the US, once they understand their own player database. And of course, there's a lot of work, charitable foundations doing a lot across Europe in this area. So there's a lot of learning to have. And in answer to the question, I don't think there is one perfect system. I don't think there ever will be. But what I will say is there's plenty to learn from each of those mature markets and to pick and choose what is right in order to protect the player. But that brings with it challenges, and that's why I say we should pick or choose, because I do think it is hard to get the subject right. Firstly, you have to find a balance between player choice and freedom to play and player protection, and it's difficult to get that right. So, for example, in the UK now, we bring in financial limits, we do affordability checks on our players onto whether they can afford to play, and there is a lot of media scrutiny about the freedom of players to actually just decide what they spend their money on. And it's finding the balance of, this is the player's free will versus we actually need to protect the player if they may be out of control. And I think it's very important to find that balance and to make sure that will lead on to one of my other points in a minute around player education. The second point is collaboration. I don't think I can emphasize enough the importance of collaboration between all the kind of stakeholders in the industry, and to do it at an early stage when the regulations are being shaped or when they're being revised in like New Jersey or New York. Get in an early stage and collaborate with the people who've done it before. And also, you know, you will now that the market is opened, you will have a set of data that you can analyze as well. But I think it is hugely important. And the one thing that I've been greatly encouraged about in the US, I've actually found quite disarming, is the collaboration with the regulators. They want to get this right. They want to hear from operators, they want to hear from suppliers, and they really want to get the protection of players right. And there has been situations in Europe where enforcement has been a way to raise standards within the industry. But right now in the US, I sense that a lot of it is about being in partnership and getting it right, with the end goal being the same for everyone. And I would continue to encourage that to be the case for as long as it works. There's also a need for player education in the area of how to gamble responsibly. It's quite a mature market in Europe. Players understand about the player protection tools, what's available to them. You know, they know they have 24/7 support. They have RG hosts that are available while they're playing. And I think it's very important that that player education also happens in the US, that they understand what choices they have, the kind of tools they can use. And again, in the US, those tools are still being built as well, new tools that can be used around self-exclusion. And again, you have the challenge around state lines and self-exclusion. If you self-exclude from one state, would that self-exclude you in another state, and so on. And those kind of technologies to be able to do that are being developed. But it's also player education about how to stay in control, how to make it a leisure activity and not go beyond that. And if it does go beyond that, where the support can be found quickly. I think another challenge, and Ed kind of touched on it, around suppliers and operators, is around scalability. Because you have so many different regulations on a state-by-state basis, you need to build a platform and you need to have an operator that is scalable and can move with the regulations, because they aren't the same in every state. So you have that challenge. And the implementation of RG measures on a state-by-state basis as the market matures will be different. They won't all be the same. So what works in one state or what is required in one state might not necessarily be required in another state. So it's important to get that right. And then finally, this one is a prickly subject, but the media, the political agenda and the inaccurate and misreported data is a problem in Europe. We have a lot of times where the media can lead the agenda. It is a subject like alcohol and tobacco, which can be quite emotive, and it is one that the media can enjoy to get involved with. And, you know, it's not the easiest industry to love by certain, you know, media and politicians. And it's important to push through that and make sure that the agenda is actually being set with the objective of responsible gambling, and ensuring that the agenda doesn't get swayed by misreported information or by emotive subjects around gambling. And that is a challenge for other industries as well, but it is an important one to get right in responsible gaming, that the regulators get out in front of that and they set the agenda in collaboration with operators, in collaboration with players, and with others that have done this before. Again, I think the key comes down to data and accurate research to get responsible gambling right. And, you know, with the media and political agenda, you also have enforcement action. For example, in the UK last year, there was £30 million worth of fines to operators in order to raise standards. And whilst that can work, I think there is also a reminder to ensure that collaboration is also key, particularly at the start of a market just regulating. And it sets the tone then. Yeah, so I think that's back over to Ed again.
Thank you, Emma. And yeah, and just before handing over to Wayne, I just sort of highlight some of the other winners in the market. I think Brandon raised a good question about will it increase the viewership of the EPL, English Premier League and NFL, and I think yes, it'll increase the viewership of all sport, really. I mean, I haven't got any statistics at my fingertips, but in other markets, time and time again, it has shown that by allowing legal betting, it ups the interest in sports, maybe for the more neutral fans. We all know, we'll all tune in to watch our team playing, but then if it's not our team playing, it can be sort of, hard to have skin in the game. And a sort of small bet can really help that and produce the interest. And I would also take that a stage further by saying, there's a lot of money being spent, and I'm sure for all of you as sports fans and watch the sports channels, you'll see the amount of advertising there is for DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, and some of the other betting companies. And that is all revenue which then allows those channels to purchase the right for some of these other sports. And even during lockdown, when there were no sports going on, it was quite interesting to see the amount of betting on Ukrainian table tennis, which I think was the only sport going on globally, and the channels were showing it, and we saw plenty of betting on it because it's a fun thing to do when you're watching sport, to give you a sort of keener interest in it. So TV network and companies. Lots of deals being done. Some of the more prominent one, PointsBet, which is a new Australian company coming in, done a deal with NBC. Exact details of the deal aren't sort of public, but it's considered to be worth about 500 million in terms of marketing collateral. Some of you would have seen, and actually they're under our license in New Jersey, that Fox did a deal with PokerStars to form a joint venture, which is now FoxBet, doing very well and rolling out over other states. And you've seen the amount of advertising that's going on from the online betting companies, during sports on those channels. The professional sports leagues also going to benefit from a global point of view. The likes of the EPL, is going to be more popular and accelerate the rights for some of those properties. And within the US, there's already been 24 partnerships announced, and more operators are being required to do some kind of financial deal to get the official data from the sports leagues, be it on a revenue share of turnover and a revenue share of winnings. State governments, we've seen the amount of taxes that's now coming in, much needed taxes into some of the state governments, and definitely the legal side of things, the financial side of things is getting states to look very hard at the legal implementation of regulating sports betting, specifically in the wider online gaming. A lot of new interest within technical companies producing new platforms and new apps. And again, the payment providers, while they were a challenge, a lot of it's online gaming is now a major generator for the likes of PayPal and some of the online wallets. And before I hand over to Wayne to talk about the impact it's had on the financial sector, I kind of leave you with the final point that we've hopefully run throughout the presentation, which is, this was all going on before it was regulated and legalized in the US. And it's much better that the US and the state governments benefit from these activities, and most importantly, put the consumer first so that they have a proper, well-regulated and safe experience. Wayne, I'll hand over to you and tell us the impact it's had on the financial institutions and investment sector on the whole.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Emma. Thank you, Jordan and Neil. I could share my screen if you want, Jordan, if you want to do that. But again, my name is Wayne Kimmel, managing partner of 76 Capital. We are a sports tech venture capital fund that invests in the sports betting industry. And, let me see if I can get this screen going here.
I'm trying to stop sharing, actually.
Oh, okay.
Do I need to come out of share, Jordan?
Yeah, if you could.
I tried. It says, so I press on share and then can't see where it says stop sharing.
I might be able to do it here.
So I think before I get started, I got to tell you, Ed, I loved your story about resorts. I mean, it reminds me of, the late 70s and early 80s with my grandfather down at the shore in Atlantic City. And he would always, very early in the morning on Saturday mornings, go to breakfast with the guys who were running resorts at the time. And he would always come back with a great story around 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And he'd say to my grandmother, he'd say, "Oh my God, I had breakfast this morning with the CEO of resorts, Frank Sinatra, and man, Pia Zadora, she's some looker." So Pia Zadora used to, used to tour with him back then. Now she plays at Piero's in Las Vegas, which is one of my favorite restaurants out there. So it's just it brought me back. It brought me back to those days. And I'll tell you, there's incredible things that are happening within the industry. And you and Emma did a good job of talking about how things are, what's happening in the world. Where we look at things, and here we go. We can actually, where the screen's gone, so maybe I could share. But one of the things let's see if I could do this. If it'll allow me to do it. It's, for some reason it's not, but it's okay. So what we'll do is, look, I think where we are, right, and at 76 Capital, and what we're all about is investing in the entrepreneurs that are truly looking to innovate and do the next thing in the overall sports industry. And whether that's in the sports tech side of things, the sports betting side of things, or the esports side of things, which quite frankly are all, intertwined and all come together, there's incredible opportunities for entrepreneurs to really, really think about what are the next things that you can do within this industry. Yeah. And that's what we do at 76 Capital. We look to find these entrepreneurs that are out there that are truly, really passionate about this, that are smart, that are nice, and truly want to do the next thing and change the world in sports. So we want to invest in those entrepreneurs. We want to then help accelerate their businesses. And, Jordan, as you talked about earlier in my bio, we have our athlete venture group where we have athletes who are involved with us, who help us, not only promote our companies, sometimes will invest with us, get involved with the businesses to really help them move forward. We are very much a hands-on group of investors to try to help people do the next thing in the sports industry. And you think about betting, think about what's happening. And, Ed touched on this. You have 25 states that have passed laws, plus DC, plus Puerto Rico. It's an incredible way for the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, across, every sport out there to really increase fan engagement, right? It's this opportunity now where, unfortunately, with everything that's going on with COVID, you don't have fans in the stands. You don't have those quote unquote butts in the seats that are going to, produce you a lot of money, right? You're from parking to concessions to the tickets themselves, right? So how are you as a sports team or league going to make money moving forward in the future? And that's where, here we go. It was amazing. PASPA overturned in May of 2018, and then we have COVID in 2020. It's here now in a way that you could be used to really drive new types of revenue for sports teams, leagues, colleges. I mean, you mentioned, I saw on one of your slides, Ed, you had something about PointsBet. I mean, the fact that PointsBet, does a deal with the University of Colorado. People in the NCAA and college world were like, oh my God, what's going on here? And then everyone's rushing to figure out how they're going to do their deal. The state of New Jersey, where Rowan is, it was also on the ballot. This one of the issues on this past election, with now hopefully going to allow if there's one more bill passed, hopefully will allow the fact that you can now bet on college sports within the state of New Jersey. So whether that's Rutgers games or Rowan games or things like that, you'll be able to bet on those games very, very soon. But I mean, you just think about what's happening. And we just got the numbers from October 2020, and $803 million was bet on sports in the state of New Jersey. 93% of those bets were bet digitally. 93%. I mean, you think about these numbers and you think how fast it's gone to all digital. It's unreal. I mean, just June of 2018, when sports betting was first regulated and legalized in New Jersey, you had only $16 million in sports bets. Now you're at $803 million. And it's amazing the amount of operators that are in New Jersey today. It's fascinating. It's really, really fascinating what's happening as the revenues are all going up, and for the operators themselves, and just the amount of handle that's being that is out there. So things are exciting. What we do is really think about how can we invest in entrepreneurs that are thinking outside of the box, who really want to take the sports betting game up another level. So whether there are new ways to collect data to be used within the sports betting industry, whether there are new ways to analyze the data and produce new ways to do things like, player level props. Last night, during the Sunday night football game, my son and I are sitting there on our DraftKings app, looking at, who's going to score the next touchdown, and we may have placed a few bets on that. Who's going to, will there be a first down, or will be a pass, or will be a run with the next play? These are things that now with your mobile apps, you're able to do things that you weren't really able to do in the past, or at least you weren't able to do in the past from a regulated perspective. And even if you were doing a lot of things offshore in other markets, look, I think this is really great that we can do these things basically above board. So that's really another exciting development. And you just look at, the amount of things that you now have, whether that's, thinking about them from the media side of things, right? So, media is different today. You had last night, Al Michaels, Chris Collinsworth talking about the lines. That was NBC, right? They're talking about it. And Al Michaels used to sort of do the little wink, wink kind of a thing. And of course, Brent Musburger, who's my partner now at VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, he would always talk about those kinds of things. And I think that these are things that you would never have talked about, but now you talk about what the line is, and you can have the the incredible conversations around this. I mean, just think about the play last night or yesterday afternoon with Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, that bomb that he caught in the end zone to win the game for the Arizona Cardinals, that put the over. It went over 56 on that play, right? And at the same time, Kyler Murray took a knee on the 2-point conversion, which enabled if you had +2.5 or +3 on that game, you won, right? Because of him taking a knee there. And then you had the basic Brian Westbrook play last night, right? Yesterday as well, with Nick Chubb running down the field. He's wide open, going to go down for a touchdown in a 10-7 game, and he runs out of bounds at the end. Well, fantasy players got upset. People that had the Browns at -4.5, they were upset. So like, what's going on here? But that's exciting. That's where we are within the world that we're playing in right now. And then there's, you mentioned, Emma talked a little bit about the integrity side of the world. We're investors in a company called U.S. Integrity. We really believe that the opportunity to make sure that everything is on the up and up, that's very important for us. So we have a number of investments across the industry, and we think these are incredible times for entrepreneurs to really come in and look at what's going on, do a deep dive of what has been happening in Europe and around the world, spend a lot of time with the old timers in Vegas, and learn. I mean, you can learn a lot from all of them, and as to what's happening in the industry. But now, how do you take it up a level? How do you take the companies that are out there today, which a lot of times I'll call them sort of the Yahoos of the world, and create the Googles, create the Amazons, create the Facebooks of the sports betting industry. And that's what we're all about at 76 Capital, investing in those types of ideas and trying to do some really exciting things in and around the industry. Jordan?
Okay. All right. Well, so thanks, Wayne. Sorry we didn't get your slides up and running there, but if you all are ready for some questions, there's a flood of them here that I think would be interesting for all of us. Before we get too far into that, you may have noticed, observers of the event, that the one and only Neil Hartman joined our panel. Neil is a legendary figure in sports media, and he is also the director of Rowan's Center for Sports Communication and Social Impact. So we're happy to have Neil join us. If you have any thoughts as well, Neil, please feel free to jump in here. I think the first question, maybe, Wayne, what are some specific things that you look for before deciding to invest in an entrepreneurial venture related to the kind of betting sports tech space?
Well, I think it really ties in nicely with the social responsibility side of things that we're talking about here, and also ties into the kind of people that we invest in. I mentioned this quickly earlier. At 76 Capital, we're all about investing in entrepreneurs that are really passionate about their idea, that are smart, that are nice, and have a really big vision. Right? So we don't want to invest in a really little small thing. We want something that can be incredibly big. We want to be able to. So I'll use an example, right? About 3 years ago, I guess about what is it? 2.5 or so years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I was introduced to Brian Musburger. His uncle is Brent Musburger. And he said to me, listen, sports betting is going to, it's going to be legal. PASPA is going to get overturned. I'm telling you, see what's going on. Come out to Las Vegas and see what we're building. And they built this, he and his uncle Brent, who had just left ESPN, the legendary broadcaster, built this glass studio right smack in the middle of a sports book in Las Vegas. And they said, what we're doing here is exactly what CNBC did by putting a studio inside the New York Stock Exchange. We are going to tell the story of what's going on within the sports betting industry, how the lines are moving, how things are shifting in those games. We're going to do that live 24 hours a day on TV, just like CNBC. And I could see in their eyes their passion, the drive, they were just going to make this happen. And it was one of the most exciting things for me. And then once PASPA was overturned, we were able to now roll out, and we've rolled out all across the country. We have studios in almost 5 different states now. It's really exciting to see that. So for us, it's really about that entrepreneur and their idea, their vision, and the fact that they just will basically in many cases never take no for an answer and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The parallel to CNBC is an unexpected one that I did not anticipate hearing in my day. But that's a cool connection to think about.
Any of you could certainly watch VEASAN. We're in 90 million homes across the country on Comcast. This is actually, when most like business people have CNBC in the background, I have VEASAN on all day long. You just go on to your Comcast box, and there it is. You look at, they're already talking about next week's Cardinals game against the Seahawks. Seahawks -3. And they'll track this game. They'll track the numbers. They'll talk about the ins and outs of this game, just like CNBC will talk about the ins and outs of what what's going to happen with Microsoft or Apple, and why is the stock going up or down. Same kind of thing is what we do, but we talk sports.
Yeah. I think a related question to that, kind of a two-part thing for all three of you. Someone asked about the role of kind of data and analytics in this industry. Obviously, that's important from the kind of technical side of running a platform and managing a platform, but then also the kind of analysis that goes into creating some of the attributes of betting and what the wagers actually look like. And so that's one topic if you could address. And then also for all three of you, what's your perspective on maintaining the integrity of the sports themselves as betting becomes so, ubiquitous, where you're talking about being able to bet on individual plays or actions within a play? What has to happen in order to ensure the integrity of the games themselves? Because if that would go away, then betting would kind of be impacted negatively, I'd imagine.
On the data front, data is the future. I can't say it strongly enough. Not just for that purpose, also for responsible gambling, for player protection, for all the analysis. Data is key to get that right. I mean, on the sports integrity side, I will say that has been a challenge in Europe, and it's one that is being dealt with quite well. I do agree that it's key, but I think Wayne may have more experience on the sports integrity side, so I will let Wayne jump in on the sports integrity side.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on the data side of things. I mean, first, that's something we're big investors in a company called Swish Analytics, which you may be familiar with, which is being used by the MGM, FanDuel, and many others that are helping provide these player level prop bets, really getting down, but you got to use all the data, and it's, the geniuses out there at Swish, what they do is just incredible. And the same thing goes for what we do with my portfolio company, U.S. Integrity, and that is very similar. It's where you're using all the data, making sure that everything is on the up and up. Really and doing that from the perspective of looking at all the data, looking at what kind of information is coming in and out, where the bet's coming from. We work with some of the largest sports books out there, from William Hill to the Betfreds to many others that are in the U.S. today. And we ingest all of their betting data on a real-time basis. We're able to flag any sort of, something that's an irregularity for them, as well as the regulators themselves that we work with in all the different states that are now legal. So these are things that are out there right now. But again, there's, this is early. We're early in this game here in the United States. And we need to really learn and make sure that we learn from Europe, and we learn from the different markets that have been out there before to make sure that we do the right thing here in the U.S. And if we do, this industry will be. I mean, people talk about this industry as a $500 billion industry. There's others that are going way more than $1 trillion industry. And I'm at the high end as well. I think this is an amazing way for people to be entertained, have a good time. But then at the same time, Jordan, you said this earlier, you're surprised to hear the CNBC kind of a thing. But at the same time, just like you can trade in Europe and you can trade on these games almost as if it's the stock market, those concepts and those types of ways of doing it, that will be here in the U.S. There's some barriers and laws and things like that are in the way right now. This new administration may have maybe a little more hands off of the Wire Act and some of the other things that are actually causing it not to be like what you can do in a true marketplace. But those things, whether it's this administration, whether it's 10 years down the road, 5 years, it's going to come, and you'll be able to trade, your sports bets just like you basically trade your stocks.
Oh, that's fascinating. You could put an auction on the Eagles to win the 2037 Super Bowl or something like that. Probably get pretty good odds at this point. But I wanted to give Neil an opportunity. Neil, if you had any observations or questions for our panel before we dive back into some of the audience questions that have been submitted.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate it, Jordan. I would just say I'm very interested in hearing how the state of New Jersey has been such a big player here in the United States. The numbers that both Ed and Wayne touched on earlier, and the amount of money that's being spent on gambling here and betting in the state of New Jersey is just mind-boggling to me. But what I wanted to ask is, what has it meant, and Ed, you had this a little bit on a graph, the impact it's had on the state itself. Has it been a good move for the state of New Jersey to pass the legislation that allowed the legalized sports betting to come here to the state of New Jersey? Has it been a boon for the state? I know it has for certain companies, but how about the state?
I think, yeah. I mean, I'm obviously speaking from one side of it, so I would say it definitely have, and there's kind of overwhelming evidence for it. I mean, created 6,000 new jobs in the States, and probably that figure for 2019 is probably now pretty out to date. The amount of money that's coming into the state government in all states in terms of increases from taxes. And you know, I have to sort of emphasize that whatever you're feeling about whether gambling is right or wrong for the individual, all this was happening anyway. People were doing this. It just wasn't regulated. They had no protection. There was no money really coming to help local economies. There was no taxes going to the state. So you know, I think it's almost been an essential thing for the state to regulate it, because not only are you kind of getting rid of social problems, but you're actually harnessing what it can be, what it can provide, and making the best use of it. So you know, I kind of, you know, I come from definitely one side of the argument, but I would really honestly say it's been a great success for New Jersey, and will be for the other states who come on board with it. I mean, there's a lot of evidence, and if anybody's kind of really interested in digging deep into the numbers, there's a good report from IDEA. In fact, if you look up ideagrowth.com, they did a big analysis of what effect it's had on the state of New Jersey so far, and that's kind of well worth a read for anybody who wants to dig into it deeper.
Yeah, Neil, it's amazing. I mean, just, you know, the 803 million in revenues, you know, top line, you know, from a sports betting in New Jersey in October, it was up $50 million from September. You know, the handle's already at $44 billion in Nevada, in New Jersey right now. Last year, the whole year was 4.6 billion. So New Jersey will eclipse that number. It's really fascinating. It's really fascinating to see how big these numbers are.
That is a spectacular number and spectacular growth. Probably pretty good from your investment perspective there too, Wayne. You're sitting on some cash flow positive companies already, I'm sure. So we're almost at the end of our time, but one of the questions I think for each of you, if each of you could answer, how did you decide to get into this industry? And do you have any advice for students who would like to get into the industry as well?
Industry. Go ahead, Ed. You go first.
Well, yeah. I mean, I no one ever believes me when I tell anybody being 6'3", but I was actually a steeplechase jockey back in the UK. So I had a kind of real passion for horse racing. I was kind of in the military at the time, and I left the military to become a racing journalist. But unfortunately, I couldn't string any of the words together. So they say, listen, you better go. You're not going to make it as a journalist, but we're setting up a data analytics company and tipping content site called Sporting Life. I went to be general manager for that, and then got into the online betting side of things. So unfortunately, I've got a long way from ever being anywhere near horses, but you know, that's kind of how I got into it. And I think that is it, you know, and you know, shown from the panel with all the guys, you know, passionate about sport, and it is a really good way of getting into the sports industry and enjoying that passion for sport, and you know, making a business and a career out of it as well.
Yeah, mine is similar. One of my grandfathers was a racehorse trainer, and my other grandfather was a bookmaker. And whilst I became a corporate lawyer, I accidentally ended up working for Sportingbet when I decided to work in-house, and there was an opportunity in a gaming company. And I joined the industry really before regulation hit, so I managed to grow with the regulation in Europe, and then of course experience both the exit from the US and the entrance back into the US. So it was somewhat by accident, but in the background in horses, and I read the newspaper from the back to the front, which I think always helps when you're trying to get a job in this industry. If you have a passion for sports, then I would say there is a place, or if you have a passion in the regulatory side, which maybe is less common, it's also a great one. I would say that the gaming industry is a seriously highly regulated industry now, and with that you can get a great career out of it, and a long-term career out of it, like many of us have.
From my perspective, you know, we are all, you know, at 76 Capital, all about investing in what's next. And when we saw what was happening and how PASPA was overturned, we truly believed that having a legal, regulated sports betting market was going to be huge here in the United States. And we wanted to, just like in the internet, and we saw the opportunity to do all those incredible things with the internet, we see the same kind of opportunity within sports betting. And so if I were a student today, oh man, first of all, this is the coolest thing ever, because we are looking for people like you, right? We are looking for young people that are incredibly smart, that understand technology, understand data, understand analytics, that know, augmented reality, virtual reality, all those things. If you know that tech and you're into that world, we want to talk to you. We want to meet you, because our companies are going to start using all this new technology and data to create these amazing new things within the sports betting industry. And another thing, if you're a gamer and you play video games and you know things about esports, that's a whole nother opportunity that many of us, that stuff's past us. It's passed us by, right? That's an amazing thing. So if you play League of Legends, if you're an Overwatch player, if you play Fortnite, and you're really good at that stuff, and you're a good player, maybe you play at college, maybe you play at Rowan, maybe you play at another university, but those are the kinds of things that if you know that, because there are lines on those games, and there's betting on those games all over the world. There's a little bit of it here in the U.S. from a regulated perspective, but it will get bigger. And so we need your expertise to help us build for the future of sports betting.
There's diverse approaches to getting into this world, and there's so many different ways to excel inside of it as well. I want to thank the three of you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was a really interesting panel, and I think we all benefited a lot from hearing about your expertise and your experience in this industry. So you're all welcome back anytime as far as I'm concerned, but yeah. So we'll imagine that everyone in the audience is clapping for you because we can't hear them. So at least Neil and I are clapping for you. So you got two people. But thanks again, and thanks to everyone. If you want to find this recording, we're going to post it on the Rowan Center for Responsible Leadership's YouTube channel, so you can check it out there if you missed any part of it. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan.